Hey guys, so in this lecture we're going to be seeing use strict, which is basically turning JavaScript into a strict mode. So I don't know if you recollect your professors, but we had many professors whom we used to say, oh, this professor is very strict, we cannot bunk this professor's lecture, we have to be attentive in this professor's lecture because he or she may ask questions. So they were very strict. Similarly, JavaScript can also be made strict. So JavaScript as a language can be made strict by using a literal called as use strict. It is not a statement but a literal expression, and it's ignored by earlier version of JavaScript. The use strict directive is new in JavaScript 1.8.5, which is ECMAScript version 5 as we say. Now the purpose of use strict is to indicate the code should be executed in strict mode. With strict mode you cannot, for example, use undeclared variables. We'll see that in a bit, but just before we move to the strict mode, let me tell you one thing, that use strict was implemented by IE from version 10 onwards, for Firefox version 4 onwards, for Chrome version 13 onwards, Safari from 5.1 and Opera from 12. So if you use strict, it will only be available in these browsers. If any browser is if your browser is before these versions, it will be just ignored. Okay, let's just go and see how use strict can be used and what effect it has on JavaScript. So let's just do x is equals to 10 and run this, and everything should run. Let's just go to the console. Everything should run, nothing will be displayed, and we have a good life. Let's just remove this, we don't need this. Let's just output x into the console and x comes up. Now let's make this JavaScript as strict, which means use strict. Okay, now let's clear this, run this, and we should get an error saying x is not defined. So initially it worked, but the moment you put JavaScript into a strict mode, it will start throwing errors for things that were not an error initially, which means it lets you do things, but the moment you say, hey JavaScript, be strict to me if I write some nonsense code or probably some invalid code, it will actually start yelling at you and saying, hey, this is an error, this is an error, this is an error. Now you can also see the effect of use strict on a function. So let me show you an example. So let's make this variable x, and let's just remove the console, we don't need that. Now let's try to put a function. Let's say my function, let's just call it. Now let's define it, function, my function. Now let's say y is equals to 20. Now let's say clear this, let's run it. Now it will yell you for y because x is working correctly. We defined and declared x correctly, but y will be a problem. The moment you put the use strict, from that point onwards on your JavaScript, it will start behaving in the strict fashion. So what if I had x equals to 10 out here, and let me just first show you the error for x equals to x is not defined. Now if I move this use strict down in the function, let me clear this, it will not complain about x, it will actually execute x correctly, but it will complain only about y because use strict starts from this line. So just be careful where you put this, and the best thing to do is always, if you're working in a strict mode, make sure you put use strict at the top of your script. Now you may ask, why use strict mode? Well, the answer is simple. Strict mode makes it easier to write secure JavaScript. So yes, because you do not, let the loopholes come into picture if someone tries to use it. Strict mode changes previously accepted bad syntax, this was a bad syntax, into a real errors, which means it started shouting that y is not defined. Now the problem is, when you mistype something in JavaScript, what will happen is it will create a new variable. So you may end up creating new global variables with a different name. Let's say I have first name and I assign some value to it. Then I create another first name. More than creating, if I just assign another value, let's say I say Abhay, let's say I say Tom. In this scenario, I'll end up having two variables. And now both, I was just trying to reassign the value to Abhay, from Abhay to Tom, but that caused a problem, and now I have two global variables. So that was just an example. You can have anything. Similarly, in normal JavaScript, a developer will not receive any errors or feedback assigning values to non-writable properties. So let's say if it's a read-only property, let's say on a get method or something like that, in that case, if you try to update it, you'll probably be seeing errors when you use it in strict mode. So to summarize, in strict mode, any assignment to a non-writable property, a getter-only property, a non-existing property, a non-existing variable, or a non-existing object will throw an error. Now let's see some of this, what I just mentioned, in an example. We have already seen about the variables. Let's quickly see about what if we have an object. So let's say let's move this useScript to the top. Let it yell at x. We already have seen this, but I'll just show you again. So it's for the variable. X is not defined. Let's define it. Let's give another variable x1 equals to an object. Let's say p equals 10, p2 equals 20, p1. So it's easier to identify. Let's run. It'll give you a problem. X1 is not defined because we do not have variable x1. Let's just give that and the error should go away. Oops. Let me run it again. Now y is not defined because I did not define y in the function. So you saw a variable, you saw it on objects. When you try to delete an object, let's say you do a delete of x. In this scenario also, it will not allow you to delete an x. It will say delete of an unqualified identifier in strict mode. In strict mode, you cannot delete a variable. So that will give you a problem. So delete. Even if you do the same thing, when you try to delete a function, that should be a problem. So let's say variable y, and rather than, let's comment this delete, otherwise it will not let us proceed. And let's say delete my function. Clear, run. Again, it will not allow you to delete in the strict mode. Now what if instead of having this, I had a duplicate parameter? So let's say function accepted parameters p1 comma p1. By mistake I mistyped it. In this scenario also, it should give me an error. Duplicate parameter not allowed in this context. You cannot have duplicate parameters, which means if you use a variable x, you can only use it once. You cannot use it twice. Let me just fix this so that we can see more errors. So the other one that we have is, let's say octal values. So remember when we had octal values, so we used to give octal values as 0, 1, 0. So anything that starts with a 0 is an octal. But when you give strict mode, anything you start with a 0, it will give you a problem. Let me comment this. Okay. Now it's yelling at octal literals are not allowed in strict mode. You see that? Similarly, if you give an escape character to the octal, let's say the escape character is given and you try to, run it with the escape character, even then it will tell you an invalid expression. So you cannot give escape characters in strict mode. You also cannot use eval keywords. So for example, let's say we have eval equals to 20. This was possible when you had no strict mode on, but unexpected eval or arguments in strict mode. And that brings us to the other one. You also cannot have arguments as a variable when you use the strict mode. So these two keywords are blocked and you cannot use them when you have the strict mode. Also, strict mode makes your JavaScript future proof, because there, again, just the way we have some reserved words, there are some future reserved keywords like implements, interface, let, package, private, protected, public, static, yield. So if you use any of these keywords as a variable name, JavaScript will start yelling at you saying, hey, you cannot use this in the strict mode. So let's say instead of arguments, you made this as public. Let's clear this, run this. reserved keyword. You see that? So these are the exceptions when you use a strict mode. Make sure you practice them and know at least what all strict words you can use versus you cannot use. If you start using strict mode and you start using JavaScript, you will get to know what other things you cannot do in the strict mode. And if you still have any questions around strict mode, feel free to ask them in the Q&A section.